The next thing we'll talk about is changing the type of data to another type. Okay, so changing the type from one type to another. Okay, and the way we do that is, again, let's go back to the previous one. The way we do that is using these functions right here. Okay, int, float, str, string, bool. Okay, these act as functions. Okay, and a function, the way we call a function is, remember, the function is called as follows. You just call the function like so, like say int, then within parentheses you pass some value, right? Just like type is a function, so you say type parentheses as a value, right? Print was a function, remember, print was a function. Print parentheses pass a value, right? That's how we call functions. Okay, a function does something to the data. It either extracts information or changes the data or does something with it. Okay, we'll learn more about functions later on, but right now think of functions as sort of keywords. Okay, things built in sort of functionality. Function is nothing but something that provides some functionality. Okay, so we have four functions that we will talk about: int, float, str, and bool. And these functions, these four functions, right, int, float, str for string, I'll just say string from now on. Okay, string, and bool. These four functions are used to change from one type to another. Okay, and I'll show you an example of how to do that. But the general form is, let's say let's say you have a floating point number. Okay, let's say you have 3.14. If you want to, let's say, instead of 3.14, you want to round it down to 3. Okay, you want to get 3. All you do is you'd say int 3.14, and this will give you the value 3. Okay, so the int will round it down. Int will round it down. Floats. Okay, so let's see an example of how we use these functions. Okay, let's go back to Replit. Let me clear the screen again. uh, okay, so uh, 3.14, it's 3.14, right? But when you say int 3.14, it'll give you 3. Okay, so if you want to change a variable, a floating point variable, to an integer variable, right, you just use the function called int, and then parentheses, and then your floating point variable, right? So let's say, I'm sorry, floating point, in this case, it's a literal, it's a floating point literal, it's not a variable. But you can also do the same thing with variables. Let's say you have a variable called pi. Pi equals 3.14. Okay, so when you type pi, it'll give you 3.14, right? Now let's say you want to store not 3.14, but just the integer part, just the whole part. And what you do is, let's say you create another variable. You say x um, equals int, x equals int of pi, and then you print x. What will you think x will print? X will print 3. Okay, the same thing can be done the other way around as well. So changing floating points to integers. Okay? I'm sorry, the other way. I'm sorry, changing integers to floating points. So let's say you have an integer. Let's say I, integer I equals 5. Okay, print I gives you 5. Now let's say you want to convert this 5 to a 5.0. All you do is you'll say float within parentheses I, 5.0, right? Or you could just say float and give the literal directly. So just say 100, and this will give you 100.0, right? Okay, so that's how you convert between integers and floating point numbers. You can also convert from integers to strings. You can also convert from integers to strings. For example, let's say you have an integer x equals 5. So when you say type of x, type x, it'll say x is an integer, right? Now though, now you can say y equals str or string of x, and you print type y. Y is now an str. Y is now a string, and if you print y, it'll give you 5, but within quotes, 5 within quotes, which means 5. It's a string value. It's not a number. Okay. Similarly, you can convert a number from a string. You can convert a string to a number rather. So let's say you have a number. Let's say you have let's say you have a string. So let's say the string s is equal to the number 1000, but inverted comma in quotes. Okay. So when you print s, it will say s is 1000, but within quotes, which means it's a text. It's a string. When you say type of s, it will give you string str, right? Now though, if let's say you want to if you want to convert this to an integer, what you'll do is you'll say let's say I. Let's reuse the variable I equals uh, int of s. Print I is now a number. I is now an integer, right? If you print type of I, it'll say int. You can do the same thing for float, right? Let's say s equals 1000, right? You could say, you know what, float s, right? S is 1000. When you say float s, what do you think it will print? What do you think this will print? It will print 1000 decimal 0. Why? Because it checks that it is a number. Yes, it is a number. It gets that number, and then it gives you the corresponding floating point number, which is 1000 decimal 0, right? Sometimes though, when you try to convert a text to an integer, it may fail. Can you think of a situation where you try to convert a string to a number and it fails? And the situation is as follows. Let's say the string that you try to convert is actually, it does not only contain numeric characters, but also alpha is more like it contains alphabetical characters as well, right? So if you, let's say, do s equals let me clear this one. You can say things like s equals, shut up, s equals CSC 120, and then you try to convert this to an integer. So you say int s. Python will complain. They'll say invalid literal for int with base 10. Okay, it says I don't know what this means. CSC, that's not a number. So I cannot convert this to a number because it has alphabets in it. Okay. Similarly with floating points, so you cannot say float s, it will do the same thing. It will complain again. It will say I cannot convert this, right? Because it has alphabets. It does not convert to a string. It's not actually a number. Okay, it has alphabets. So I cannot convert the string to either an integer or a float.